Chalo guys, let's move ahead. On an overall basis, you have close to 24 marks of weightage in your question paper from this single chapter, if you also take into account the optional questions that are allowed. So taking into account all the questions, including the extra option that you have, the weightage is 24 marks. You have a dedicated question number 2 from this chapter, which will read as compute total income, but you will observe that a major chunk of the question will be from this chapter. In addition to that question number 2, you also have at times it is question 1, at times it is question number 2. In addition to that question, that full-fledged question, you also have a small question, some question 4 or question 5, where what the institute does is it gives you 4 or 5 small case studies, and those case studies are based on some case laws that are rendered in this chapter of PGBP. This chapter is definitely going to be part of a question paper. It is as lengthy as capital gains, or maybe I can say even lengthier than capital gains. The range of section numbers are way too much. But there is a very good thing about this chapter. Over a period of time, you will observe, and especially when you solve the question bank, you will observe this, that a major part of the full-fledged PGBP sum can be predicted. The trend that you will observe is there are certain adjustments which are standard adjustments in the question. The question will be a theory question. Unlike in IPCC, where you used to get a profit and loss account and followed by profit and loss account, there were adjustments. At the CA final level, the profit and loss account is not given to you. Straight away adjustments are given. So the first line of the question will tell you who the assessee is. Most probably the assessee will be a company. Sometimes they ask you stuff relating to partnership form also. But 9 out of 10 questions you'll find they are all based on companies. So the question will begin with the net profit given to you, and then there'll be about 15-20 adjustments. Those adjustments are standardized. There will be few adjustments which are repetitive. There will be one adjustment on depreciation. There will be one adjustment on provision for gratuity, provident fund provisions. There will be one adjustment based on section number 43D, deduction allowed on payment basis only. There will be one adjustment based on some case law. So you can very easily identify that these things are definitely going to be there in your paper, in that question. So automatically it helps you to understand that, okay, these are the sections which I have to be crystal clear. I have to know them because they are anyways going to be there in the question. So that way the benefit is that it will be a lengthy question to solve, but it will be a predictable lengthy question. This chapter focuses on, now let's get into what the heading of this chapter means. This chapter focuses on business and profession. The word business has been defined in section 2, subsection 13. Nothing great, but I'm going to use this definition throughout the chapter as examples. So I'm just spending about 5 minutes on it. Business includes trade, which means we are involved in buying and selling of goods. Business includes manufacture. Manufacture means you are talking about production and selling of goods. business includes commerce. Here I am talking about providing services. Service providers like coaching classes, restaurants, the hotel industry, they are not dealing with goods, they are dealing with services. Whereas shopkeepers who are doing trading, car manufacturers, mobile phone manufacturers, they are AC manufacturers, they are all involved in the business of manufacturing. So business includes trading, manufacturing, providing services. The fourth leg of the definition is business includes an adventure which is in the nature of trade or in the nature of commerce or in the nature of manufacture. Even here, there is nothing great to learn. The only thing to understand is how various courts have interpreted this term, adventure in the nature. The word adventure has been interpreted as something done irregularly. So it's like it's a one-time activity. Generally, trade, commerce, manufacture, they denote regular continuous activities. But that does not mean that business is only continuous activities. As in seasonal businesses. Business is done just once. Business is not done on a regular year-to-year basis. Will still be called as business only. If there is an element of profit involved, then whether you do those activities of buying and selling goods regularly or one time, what you're doing is still business. So the definition of business not only covers regular activities done, but it also covers these activities which are not done on a normal basis, done seasonally, done once in a year, maybe done once in 3 years. If you have the intention of earning profit, if you're doing business, I mean, that is called as doing business. The second word is profession. Now, profession has been defined in a rather incomplete, rather loose manner. Profession, the way it has been defined, is profession includes vocation. That's it. You will find at many places the definition being so incomplete. Like I can take a comparable example. Companies Act 2013 defines the term dividend as dividend includes interim dividend. Bas, that's it. When the law does not define anything in depth, but it defines it like this, profession includes vocation. It means the lawmakers do not want to define the word and create more confusion. They want everyone to understand the word the way a common man would understand, the way a dictionary would define it. So profession includes vocation. That means you interpret the term profession normally. Find out what the normal meaning is or find out what the dictionary meaning is. Now the normal meaning, the dictionary meaning means you will call somebody as a professional if that person has the requisite degree or the requisite qualification. And the person is using the degree or the qualification to earn profits. So you are a practicing doctor, you're a practicing chartered accountant, you're a practicing lawyer, you have the necessary degree for it. The word vocation, this is talking about people who have skills or talent and are using that skill or talent as a professional activity, as a means to earn profit. Actors, cricketers, sports persons, they do not have a degree or qualification, but we still call MS Dhoni as a professional cricketer, Virat Kohli as a professional cricketer. We still call Mr. Amitabh Bachchan, Mr. Shah Rukh Khan as professional actors. So acting, sports is skill and talent, but they are still called professionals because they are using their skill talent to earn profit. So whether you are involved in business activities or profession activities, what you're trying to earn is profit. Now, that means what is being taxed here is the profit. And how will I calculate my profits? I'll calculate my profits as incomes minus expenses. Now I'm kind of speaking something about the computation. Pay attention properly. What is charged to tax is the balancing figure profit, not the credit side. So the way to calculate my profits will be incomes minus expenses. But these profits, they are currently computed as per accounting principles, as per accounting concepts, as per accounting concepts and conventions, as per accounting standards. They are computed as per accounts. But then I will have to make taxation related adjustments here. What do I mean by taxation related adjustments? It is computed as per accounts. So which means the assessee is preparing his books of account. He is following a particular method of accounting. What method of accounting is the assessee following? So he has two options. He can either follow the accrual system or what we also call as mercantile system, or he can follow the cash system of accounting. Income Tax Act does not prescribe one method. Income Tax Act does not say that one method is compulsory and the other method is not to be followed. Income Tax Act does not say one is superior and the other is inferior. Income Tax Act says method of accounting is at the choice of the assessee. But the only thing that we expect is either accrual system or cash system, you have to follow this consistently. Consistently followed by the assessee. This is what we expect. This thing that I wrote, this whole stuff, this. This is section number 145, subsection 1, which does not prescribe any method of accounting, but it says you are free to choose your method of accounting. You just have to follow consistently that method of accounting. This is necessary for PGBP as a head of income and income from other sources, not for all 5 heads. Because for the other 3 heads, calculation of taxable amount is as per that relevant head a fixed, a standardized pattern. As in, if I am talking about income from salary, salary is taxed either on due basis or on receipt basis, whichever happens earlier. This is prescribed by charging section 15. As far as house property as a head of income goes, income is taxed on due basis. You will observe in the house property computation, the words used are rent receivable is taken as your gross annual value. Then certain adjustments are allowed, but the focus is on receivable. Whatever was the rent receivable for the year will be taken as your income. PGBP you are free to choose any method of accounting that you want. Professionals like us, chartered accountants, doctors, we generally follow cash system of accounting. So even in your offices, you would have observed that when your CA firm just gives a invoice or a bill to the client, it does not immediately record this as its income. It waits for the money to be received, and when the client gives a check, that is the time when you record this as your income. Of course, cash system of accounting is generally followed by professionals, but the professionals can also follow accrual system of accounting. There is no restriction. Capital gains, again, is taxed on due basis. And the proof of that is section 45(1). The default year of taxability is the year of transfer. When the transfer has happened, consideration is receivable. Whether it is received or not, you don't know, but it is receivable. That's why if you observe, now you can go back to the textbook and read. You will observe at many places the words received or accrued as a result of transfer of the capital asset. Your consideration is received or accrued. Or the amount accrued, whether received or not, will be taken as your consideration. Income from other sources is also to be computed according to the method of accounting. Of course, there are certain exceptions that you may remember. Dividend income is always taxed in a different manner. If you get some interest on compensation, that is always taxed on receipt basis. Do hell with your method of accounting, but generally speaking, method of accounting is to be followed. This is provided to you as per section 145 subsection 1. So restricting myself to PGBP. Profits are to be taxed, which means they will have to be calculated. So the first way, the first stage at which I calculate my profits is my accounting profits. That is as per the method of accounting. We don't prescribe a method. You choose the method. We will accept your method, but we only expect you to follow it consistently. But then the second part, taxation related adjustments. My profits, they are computed as per accounts, but then I also need to take into account the taxation related adjustments. Now, what is this taxation related adjustments? First set of adjustments are PGBP sections that are created, section number 28 to section number 44 DB. Where we are aware that every expenditure in accounts is not treated identical or similar in tax. Whatever you remember from your IPCC related to this chapter, you can at least tell me one thing very easily. The depreciation as per accounts and the depreciation as per tax, is it going to be the same? No, it will be different. So, what depreciation will be debited in the P&L? The accounting depreciation or the tax depreciation? Of course, the accounting depreciation. But what is going to be allowed in income tax computation? The IT depreciation, the depreciation as per section number for depreciation? Section 32. Perfect. What does this mean? I am not going to change my accounts to incorporate the tax depreciation. I will have to follow accounting standards. I'll have to follow provisions of Companies Act if I'm a company. So profit that is computed as per accounts will have an impact of accounting depreciation. I cannot take that profit and straight away pay income tax on that profit. I'll have to adjust the depreciation, because depreciation in tax is calculated blockwise, and that's what's going to be allowed. So section number 32 tells me that tax depreciation has to be allowed as a deduction while you compute profits. But what has currently been allowed as a deduction is the accounting profit. From the credit side, incomes, accounting depreciation has been debited or deducted. So I'll have to nullify that effect. Expenditure incurred on scientific research gets a weighted deduction if you make a contribution to outsiders. Do you at least remember this? I don't expect the exact thing from you. If you remember it, wonderful. But do you at least remember that something like this is there? That you get a weighted deduction for the contributions that you make? Do you remember anything like this? So if I give 100 rupees, I get a deduction of 150 rupees in tax. The situation is if I pay 100 rupees, my expenditure debited in the P&L account, this expense will be only 100. But tax tells me that I have to take a deduction of 150. That extra 50 rupees is not debited in accounts because it was never incurred, it was never spent. But taxation allows me to adjust that 50. So I will start with my accounting profits, but I will make taxation adjustments like this. Another stuff, taxation related adjustments are due to case laws. Where the High Court and the High Court or the Supreme Court said that this expenditure has to be treated capital in nature. So any assessee incurring that expense, it has to be treated as capital in nature. There was no express section mentioning it as capital, but the courts interpreted 2 to 3 sections together, they looked at the facts of the case, and they realized that okay, if this is the nature of expense incurred, then it has to be treated as capital. Then I will have to, then courts have said this is capital in nature. Accounting standards may prescribe it as capital, may prescribe it as revenue. You will find multiple examples where accounts treats it as a revenue expense, tax treats it as a capital expenditure. So the treatment in accounts and treatment in tax will be different. I am starting with accounting profit and I'll have to make tax related adjustments. That is not because of some specific section, but it is case laws. But of course, I can also say like this, that case laws are interpretations of the sections. The difference is this interpretation is done by the court. The third type of tax related adjustment that is possible is adjustments due to income computation and disclosure standards, what we call as ICDS. Section 145 subsection 2 gives power to the central government to notify ICDS. Now what are they? Use this term. They are standards. Standards for what? For computation of income and for disclosure of income. They are standards prescribed by the central government for PGBP as a head of income and IFOS. So obviously they are tax related standards. They are not accounting standards. That means whatever we are studying in ICDS is for taxation, and that too, that is only for PGBP and IFOS. In the computation of income under the head PGBP, these standards are to be followed. In the disclosure of some income under the head PGBP, these standards are to be followed. So I am computing my profits as per accounts following accounting standards, but the treatment prescribed by accounting standards may match the ICDS treatment, may not match the ICDS treatment. So if it does not matches the ICDS treatment, I will have to give effect to the ICDS treatment. I'll give an example. Valuation of inventory. Accounts tells me that inventory has to be valued at cost or at market value, whichever is lower. Market value is also called as, or the term used is net realizable value. Whichever is lower, this is going to be the value of my closing stock. Now the interesting thing. The same treatment, the same formula, cost or NRV, whichever is lower, is the closing stock valuation. This is there in accounts also, and this is there as per ICDS also. The treatment is the same. Accounts and ICDS both give you the same formula. But ICDS says that you have to do this comparison category wise. Whereas accounts is telling you that there is no category wise as such. So you will do it unit wise or you will do it inventory wise. Now there can be a difference. Example. This provision of ICDS has now been incorporated into the Income Tax Act in section 145A. ICDS were announced assessment year 17-18, and then to give it more authenticity, from a standard it was converted into a section. But when you read 145A, it will tell you cost or net realizable value, whichever is lower, computed in accordance with ICDS. So whatever methodology is prescribed in ICDS, you have to follow it. Instead of now calling it as ICDS number 2, I will call it as section 145A. Accounts, you will do it unit wise. And tax tells you to do it category wise. Example. Shares are held as stock in trade as on 31st March 2020. For each share, cost and NRV is given to you. Lower of cost or NRV is what we would do in accounts. Shares of Reliance Industries Limited costed me 100 rupees. Their NRV as on 31st March 2020 was 75. Lower of cost or NRV 75. This is my valuation done in accounts on an individual unit wise basis, stock wise basis. By doing that, equity shares closing stock works out to 495. But what ICDS tells is, do not do it unit wise, do it category wise. So divide your stock in trade into categories. Equity shares is one category, debentures is other category. So what will now happen is that in accounts, my closing stock of equity shares, which is of course held as stock in trade, will be, in my example, 495. And how is 495 computed? Script wise. This is as per accounts. But what does ICDS tell me? ICDS, that is now I'll say section number 145A. It tells me to do it category wise. So take the total cost of all equity shares. Compare it with the total NRV of those equity shares. Whichever is lower is my stock valuation as per ICDS, as per tax. And when we do it on a category wise basis, on a total basis, I come to the conclusion that 540 or 535, whichever is lower. So 535 is my stock valuation. Now you'll realize that due to this, my profits will increase by 40 rupees, the difference. Profit computed as per accounts will have a closing stock value of 495. But that closing stock in tax has to be valued at 535. So I will have to make the taxation adjustment of 45 rupees as per this ICDS. 40 rupees, not 45 rupees. 40 rupees will have to be added into my profit, saying my closing stock valuation is actually 535 and not 495. Guys, did you understand this? People, did you understand this? I start with profits computed as per accounts and I do taxation related adjustments, incomes and expenses. So taxation related adjustments are sections, case laws, ICDS. Now, I'll also speak something like this. My profit computation is incomes less expenses. This is my profit. And I'll say this is what is done in accounts. So I'll start with accounts. Incomes that are credited to my P&L account. They can be PGBP related incomes. They can be income from other heads of income. They can be incomes which are exempt under section 10 of the Income Tax Act. Accounts does not recognize heads of income and taxable income and exempt incomes. Account says income is income. So for accounts, agriculture income is also income, dividend income is also income, rent from property is also income, and sales is also income. Everything gets credited to P&L. Which means when I do tax adjustments, what I will have to do is, in taxation adjustments, these two will have to be reduced from my net profit because they are not part of PGBP. It may also happen that some income is not credited to P&L, but they are chargeable to tax, but it's not credited to P&L. Maybe it is credited to some reserves, or maybe it is credited to the capital account of an individual, but it's still chargeable to tax under the head PGBP. Now what I'll have to do is that I'll have to add this to my net profit. There may also arise a situation where some income is not income as per accounts, but is treated as income either as per ICDS or as per some section of Income Tax Act or as per some case law. Then I will have to give effect by adding this amount to the net profit. For example, a fixed asset for scientific research is given 100% deduction under section 35 of Income Tax Act. But that fixed asset is still treated as a balance sheet item only. Now, when that fixed asset is sold, the sale proceeds are directly taxable. In the profit and loss account, you will only include the surplus, not the sale proceeds. But Income Tax Act is telling you that the whole sale proceeds are taxable because the whole cost was allowed as a deduction under section 35. So in the eyes of accounts, only the surplus is income, not the sale proceeds. Only the surplus should be taxed. But in the eyes of tax, the whole sale proceeds should be taxed. Now that sale proceeds is not treated income as per accounts, but is treated as income as per section 35. So I'll have to add it to the net profit to find my taxation profit. Guys, did you understand this? Similarly, now I talk of the expenditure part. The expenses, they are debited to the P&L account, but they are disallowed by Income Tax Act. They are disallowed by Income Tax Act, maybe because they are personal expenses which have been debited to P&L. They are disallowed by Income Tax Act because there is some default that has happened, say for example, TDS defaults. They are disallowed by Income Tax Act because you've made excessive payment with an intention of avoiding income tax. Accounts does not recognize all of this. Accounts just recognizes the expense and debits it to P&L. But Income Tax Act will disallow due to some reason. So this will have to be added to my net profit. There could be expenses debited to P&L account, but they belong to other heads of income, or they are related to exempt incomes. Now, so incomes which are exempt are not taxed under PGBP or under any head, then the related expense also should not be considered for deduction. So even this will have to be added to the net profit. There are some expenses for which the case laws tell you that they are disallowed, or the case laws tell you that they are allowed. There are some case laws which treat the expenditure as a revenue expense and give the judgment is given in favor of the assessee. And there are some case laws where the expenditure is treated as a capital expense, not eligible for a deduction. And so they are disallowed and the judgment is given in favor of the department. So if they are to be disallowed, then this is to be added to the net profit. But if they are to be allowed, then this has to be reduced from the net profit. And a similar treatment is possible in case of ICDS also. All this is how you are going to solve your question. Look at this. Net profit or net loss as per statement of profit and loss. 4 taxation related adjustments to have to be done. Expenses debited to the statement of profit and loss, but disallowed. Why is it disallowed? Either due to sections or due to case laws or due to ICDS provisions. Incomes which are not credited to the statement of profit and loss, but taxable. They are not recorded in the books itself, subsequently discovered. They are recorded in the books, but not in the statement of profit loss. They are taxable as per ICDS. They are taxable as per some case laws. Expenses which are not debited to the statement of profit and loss, but allowed. So they are not debited to statement of profit and loss, but taxation allows it, ICDS allows it, court judgments allow it. Incomes which are credited to the statement of profit and loss, but either they are exempt from tax or they are taxable under a different head of income. Then you have to reduce these incomes. This is how you are going to compute your taxable PGBP. At the IPCC level, we focus on the student following this format crystal clear like this, the way it is. But at the CA final level, it has been observed that the CA Institute, when it gives you your suggested answers, the two things that are added, one is relating to expense and the other is relating to income, all of them are put up together. So you give a common heading, expense debited but disallowed / incomes not credited but taxable. That's it. And then in that common heading, you can add up everything. So you need not waste your time mentally in classifying, okay, this is expense, let me write in this heading, and that is income, let me write in that heading. At the CA final level, that much level of presentation is not expected from you. You're just expected to give a common heading for add and a common heading for less. In that, you can merge up incomes and expenses, because what's more important is the student applying the provision here. That's the tougher part rather than the presentation. So you can, although this is a format, you need not strictly follow the format. You can add the two things together, incomes and expenses. You can less the two things together, incomes and expenses. But yes, this is how computation is done. In this, minor modifications are possible as far as presentations are concerned. Guys, are we clear with this so far? Okay. The last thing that we'll do today, section 28, which is my charging section. It's a very lengthy section, so obviously finishing the section is not going to be possible. But there are certain points in this section which we can do very quickly. They are very easy. And over the last 16-17 days, at some places, I have kind of created a base for this. So it becomes kind of very easy for me right now. I'll do the easy things right now. Tomorrow when we resume our lectures, we will finish charging section 28, the pending points. We'll do case laws, and then we'll move ahead in the chapter. Tomorrow, I'll give you a broad framework of how to study this chapter. You can observe that the chapter is from section number 28 to section number 44 dB. And you know it from your IPCC knowledge. It's not 44 minus 28, 16 to 17 sections. Of course not, it's not like that. There are a lot many sections, lot more than 16, 17 sections. So there is a certain manner in which the chapter can be categorized. And if we do that, if we are able to do that, it will be very easy for us to understand what section means what and how are we going to study this. And therefore, tomorrow, after finishing section 28, I'll give you a framework on how to study this youth chapter. But currently, as of now, it'll be too premature in discussing that with you. I'll just rather focus on doing some points. Charging section 28 first point is nothing but the name of the head. It says any profit or any gain that arises due to any business or any profession. This business or profession is carried on at any time during the previous year. Nothing great here, nothing great. We are already aware. You call it profits or you call it gains. It is either arising from a business or from a profession, and it is carried on at any time during the previous year. We are aware that continuously carrying on business, it's not necessary. It could be a seasonal business. It could be done just once. So carried on at any time during the previous year. This means it could be seasonal also, or it could be regular also. It's not necessary that business has to be carried on for all 12 months. It can be carried on at any time. And also, now it's a very far-fetched thing that I'm speaking, but you may remember definition of previous year. Section 2, subsection 34, read with section number 3. Previous year is the year immediately preceding the assessment year. But in case of a business or profession which comes into existence during the previous year, this previous year can be a broken period. Do you remember anything like this? I had done this with you in the first lecture. Do you remember anything like this? So the basic definition of previous year is immediately preceding the assessment year. But if a new business profession comes into existence during the previous year can be a broken period. This is defined in the previous year's definition. This is mentioned in the previous year definition. And section 28 is also harmoniously interpreting everything. Section 28 is also saying the same thing. That for you to be taxed under this head, it is not necessary that the business should be carried on for all 12 months, for all 365 days. A new business coming into existence, your first previous year can be a broken previous year. So I will say, okay, my business was carried on from 1st of October to 31st of March, from 1st of January to 31st of March. That is also a previous year for the purpose of this new business, and profits from that business will be taxed. Clear, guys? Guys, are you clear? Second income. I'm sure many of you will remember this. I had done this with you last Sunday. Amounts received from Keyman insurance policy. What do you remember? If you can quickly reply, we can finish this point. Amounts received from Keyman insurance policy. Three heads are possible. Great. So amount received from Keyman insurance policy will be taxed under the head PGBP if it is received by the employer. Obviously, the employer is involved in business or profession activities. So this what I'm writing. This is my section 28. It will be taxed under the head salaries if the amount is received by my employee. And this is my section 17 subsection 3, which defines the whole concept of Keyman insurance policy in the chapter of salaries. And it will be taxed as income from other sources if it is received by some other person. And when I say other, I mean this person is not employee, this person is not employer. IFRS as a head of income will apply if PGBP does not apply, if salaries does not apply. This is what section 56(2) told me. So when we were doing IFRS, I was focusing on this part. Today I'm focusing on this part. And of course, clarification, amounts received will mean the sum assured also and any bonus that is received. Everything will be taxed. Third point. I'm presuming Keyman insurance stuff is clear, so we can move ahead. Important for this chapter. As a partnership firm, you pay certain incomes to the partner. First, you pay interest to the partner on his capital. Second, any salary, any bonus, any commission, or any other remuneration by whatever name you call it in accounts. This is received as a partner. I'll make it very simple. Throughout the chapter, I'll call this as salary received as a partner. Instead of mentioning the whole thing repetitively, bonus, commission, remuneration, by whatever name called, we'll use one term for it, a shortcut term, salary as a partner. And the third item is share of profit. Now, tell me quickly, share of profit, is it taxable for the partner or exempt? Share of profit, exempt for the partner under section 10 subsection 2a, because this profit is the after tax profit. The profit is after the firm has paid the tax. So share of profit is exempt, but interest on capital and salary as a partner, are they exempt or are they taxable? For the partner, they are taxable. But for the partner, what should be the head of income? We have written the word salary. So does it mean it should be income from salary? Does it mean it should be income from salary? It should be PGBP. Okay. Why should it be PGBP? It should not be salary. There is no employer-employee relationship between the firm and the partner. When the firm is paying interest on capital to the partner, it's not like you're earning interest on debentures or interest on bank fixed deposit. It's not an investment income that you're doing. You're a partner, you are doing business. The difference is you're not doing business alone as a sole proprietor. You're doing business in partnership with everyone. With everyone, I mean with the others. So you are doing business. That means for the partner, these two incomes are taxable, and they are taxable as profits and gains of business or profession under section 28. That means this section 28, this point that we are studying is from the partner's angle. Now, in this point, which is from the partner's angle, there is a small proviso created. It's a very common sense proviso. It says if there is any amount which is covered under section 40B, then such amount is not to be covered under this section 28. Now that means we got to interpret what this means. And the moment I open 40B, the heading of this 40B is amounts which are not deductible. The moment I say not deductible, deduction, I'm talking about expenditure. So amounts which are not deductible, not allowed as a deduction. Now going back to the transaction, this amount will not be deductible under section 40B. So that means this is for the firm. Amount is not deductible for the partnership firm. For the firm, it's an expense. That means what you will be doing is you'll be taking the net profit, and as per section 40B, a certain amount is disallowed, not deductible. And this will be the taxable PGBP for the partnership firm, not deductible for the firm. This is what the impact is. So obviously, it goes without saying that if this particular amount is taxable for the partner, just because section 28 says it is taxable, then there'll be double taxation. And so we are saying that this amount is not taxable for the partner. Such amount will not be covered by section 28, for which section 40B has been applied. 28 is section of income. So this is not taxable for the partner under section 28. In very simple terms, I can write down that for the partnership firm, whatever is allowed, only that much will be taxable for the partner. If a particular expenditure is disallowed for the firm, that is not taxable for the partner. When we do section 40B in depth, and that 40B comes up in your question papers multiple times, I will repeat this concept with you. You'll find me using this point again. For the partner, only that amount is taxable under section 28, which is allowed. If something is disallowed under section 40B, that much will not be taxable for the partner. Are we clear with this much? Okay. I'll take up the last point now. This point is talking about export incentives. this is something that is important. When we do the chapter of deductions from gross total income, we will be seeing this export incentives as one of the points at a very important place. Export incentives are basically incentives given by the government to promote exports, and because if exports are promoted, our foreign exchange reserves grow, foreign exchange inflow happens into India. Now we are selling these for export incentives and earning profits. Example, government gives us something called as DFRC, duty free replenishment certificate. Earlier there used to be DEPB, duty entitlement passbook scheme, duty entitlement passbook, PB. Now it has been replaced by this DFRC. Basically what this means is, if your exports exceed a certain target, they will give you a certificate. In that certificate, it will be written that you can import a particular product duty free. This DF, duty free, means there will be no basic customs duty that is imposed. No basic custom duty will be imposed. You just have to pay that CVD, countervailing duty. Basic duty is not imposed. So anybody who is importing that particular product just has to produce that certificate. The custom officer will remove the basic custom duty. He will just calculate the countervailing duty. You have to pay that amount, and that's it. You can take the goods. Which means if you understand business, you'll agree that custom duty gone, my production cost comes down. Production cost comes down, automatically profits will increase. And those profits are normally taxable. Normally taxable. That is not what we are looking at in this point. No. In this point, we are looking at a scenario where I have that DFRC, duty free replenishment certificate. But I don't need the product which I can import using the certificate. I am not in need of that product. The certificate says I can import steel, but I don't need steel in my business. Somebody wants steel in the business, so I can sell that certificate. And sale proceeds of that DFRC is say 4 lakh rupees. Of course, the cost of obtaining DFRC is 0. I got the DFRC because I met the export targets of the government. So government gave me the certificate free of cost. I did not pay anything to get the certificate, but I sold it to someone. Say I sold it to Vinay. Vinay will use that certificate and save his custom duty. For this, he's paying 4 lakh rupees to me. Obviously, Vinay buys that certificate from me by paying 4 lakh rupees. The custom duty that he will be able to save will be more than 4 lakh rupees. Otherwise, there's no benefit only for Vinay. So Vinay buys this certificate. He is able to save in total a custom duty of 6 lakh rupees using the certificate. But to get the certificate, he has to pay 4 lakh rupees to me. So in this whole process, Vinay earns a profit of 2 lakh rupees. As in, Vinay is able to reduce his production cost by 6 lakhs, but he has paid 4 lakh rupees. So his savings is 2 lakh rupees. For Vinay, that 2 lakh rupees automatically will be part of the profits. Vinay will debit in his P&L account 4 lakh rupees of amount paid for DFRC. Instead of debiting 6 lakhs as custom duty, which he will never incur, he will debit 4 lakh rupees as a cost. So his profit automatically increased by 2 lakh rupees. Guys, did you understand what I just spoke? I did not write it. I just spoke that stuff out. DFRC costed Vinay 4 lakhs. Custom duty would have cost 6 lakhs. Instead of debiting 6 lakhs, he is debiting only 4 lakhs. So his balancing figure profit increased by 2 lakh rupees for Vinay. That is normally taxable. But Ronak sold that DFRC, and that 4 lakh rupees is sale proceeds for Ronak. Guys, are you clear? People, are you clear? So when I would debit 4 lakh as cost, Ronak will credit 4 lakh rupees as sale proceeds of DFRC, and the cost is 0. So the whole profit of 4 lakh, this is taxable under section 28. Similarly, another export incentive that is provided is called as cash compensatory support, CCS. I'll use these terms: support given by government in the form of cash. So this is monetary support, and that is compensation. Compensation for reducing your export price. In the international market, Indian products are costlier as compared to other products because our manufacturing is labor intensive, depends on labor. And outside India, there are countries which have developed superb technology, and their production is based on the machinery, less on labor and more on capital. And so they can do bulk production, their production cost decreases, so their sale value is also less. Whereas our production is labor intensive, so our cost is higher, our sale proceeds are also higher. Then it is observed that in the international market, best example are Chinese products. In the international market, our products are priced, Indian products are priced higher and foreign products are priced lower. So we are unable to export our goods, we are unable to sell our goods. So government told the exporters, reduce your sale price. The moment sale price is reduced for the Indian manufacturers, the moment sale price is reduced, automatically it will impact the profit. So government said, don't worry. You ensure that exports happen. Your P&L account export sales should be at a lower price so that you can be competitive in the market. And we will give you cash compensatory support. We will deposit some amount into your bank account. For this sales coming down, your profit will also come down. So we will give you support in the form of cash. Now I hope you understand this is related to exports. And the moment I say related to export, it means it is related to export of goods, which means this is an income which is related to PGBP. So instead of having export sales as my income, I'm having cash compensatory support as income. So it goes without saying here that this amount should be taxable. Guys, did you understand this? People, are we clear? Okay, fine. We'll end our session today here. Tomorrow when we resume, we'll pick up